The first tremor of change began on a quiet plateau of Osha stone, where an unfamiliar wind moved dust in coils and rings that had never existed in the memory of the land. The plateau stretched over a continent whose maps were drawn with the indifference of millennia, and for as long as the world had rolled beneath its red sun, the place had known nothing more remarkable than the steady erosion of time. Yet on that day, when the red sun rose with a peculiar glint, as if hinting at a transformation long in the making, an expedition of human explorers stepped from the hatch of their lander and left the first set of footprints ever made by intelligent life upon the stone. They came from a vessel that orbited far above, a craft named the Resolute Arrival, a name chosen in the belief that perseverance and boldness were the twin pillars of every human endeavor. The explorers had traveled across endless spans of interstellar dark to stand upon this uncharted world. The planet had been designated a catalog number during the voyage, but no number could stir the soul, so the crew unofficially adopted a name spoken first by the linguist, a name inspired by the ancient myths of Earth. They called the world Auracida. The name carried no legacy, no burden, no memory of empires or tragedies. It was a clean name for a clean beginning, and none of them knew yet whether that beginning would be triumph or catastrophe. The leader of the landing team was a tall, broad-shouldered man named Cainwen Astrin, known among his colleagues for a resolute calm and a voice that settled the nerves of those around him. Cainwen was not driven by glory or ambition, but by a conviction that humanity's future lay somewhere beyond familiar skies. He carried that conviction like a lantern in the dark, and it had guided every choice that led him here. Beside him walked Telendra Vorin, a specialist in planetary biology whose mind overflowed with questions about life in all its possible forms. Telendra's curiosity was relentless, and she often became so focused on the details of her work that she forgot about her surroundings until someone reminded her to breathe. On Cainwen's other side strode Vetran Hollies, a stoic individual whose technical expertise in atmospheric engineering had saved the crew more than once. Vetran was a person of few words, yet every one of those words mattered. Behind them moved the remaining explorers, each carrying equipment that glinted faintly in the morning light. Cainwen looked across the vast plain, the horizon rising like a shallow bowl beneath the red sky. The planet was barren at first glance, but that did not discourage Telendra. She knelt beside a cluster of mineral pillars whose surfaces shimmered with faint iridescence. She touched one gently with the tip of her gloved finger, and the pillar responded by pulsing with a slow, deep glow as if acknowledging her presence. Telendra inhaled sharply and called for Cainwen and Vetran. They crouched beside her and observed the shimmering phenomenon, transfixed by the discovery that the planet might not be lifeless after all. The pillars might not be alive in any conventional sense, yet they seemed to possess internal structures that flickered with a kind of order. Telendra suggested that the pillars could be biological, mineral, or even something entirely new. Vetran scanned the landscape with an instrument that hummed softly in his hands, and after a moment he announced that the pillars extended in patterns too regular to be natural. That meant something had shaped them or grown them. The revelation caused a ripple of unease among the team, for their mission was based on the assumption that the world was uninhabited and untouched by civilization. If the pillars were a form of architecture rather than a natural formation, then whoever had constructed them might still exist somewhere unseen. Cainwen ordered the team to establish a perimeter while they investigated further. As he moved among the shimmering formations, he felt a strange sensation of being watched. It was not paranoia or fear, but a prickling awareness, as though the planet observed its new visitors with quiet calculation. The feeling persisted even when he turned his helmet toward the empty horizon. Nothing moved except the dust stirred by the wind, and yet something in the air felt charged with intent. The explorers set up temporary equipment to analyze the pillars. Telendra hypothesized that the structures might represent a form of communication, perhaps a method of storing information in layered crystal formations. She believed the glow that pulsed along their surfaces might represent signals or messages encoded in frequencies invisible to the naked eye. Vetran remained skeptical, pointing out that the patterns could be the result of geological processes shaped by magnetic fields. Kainwen listened to both arguments, acknowledging that the truth might lie somewhere between their theories. He instructed the team to collect samples for further study. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher and the air grew warmer. The planet had an atmosphere rich in unfamiliar compounds that reacted to heat by producing ripples of luminous haze near the ground. The haze drifted across the plain like faint blue mist, distorting the horizon and creating shimmering mirages. The explorers paused their work to observe the phenomenon, captivated by the surreal beauty of the world around them. Even Vetran, who rarely expressed emotion, allowed himself a moment of quiet awe. As the day progressed, Telendra discovered something astonishing. She had been examining one of the pillars when she noticed a sequence of faint etchings beneath the surface. The etchings formed intricate patterns reminiscent of geometric diagrams, yet they also resembled script. Telendra speculated that the pillars might contain encoded records left by an ancient civilization that once inhabited Auricida. Kainwen felt a surge of excitement tempered by caution. He wondered whether the civilization still existed somewhere on the planet, or whether it had vanished long before humanity's arrival. Either possibility carried profound implications. The team worked well into the afternoon, each step of their investigation revealing new mysteries. Kainwen began documenting their findings for transmission back to the Resolute arrival, but as he composed the report, a low vibration shuddered through the ground. At first he thought it was a tremor caused by geological activity, but the vibration repeated in rhythmic intervals, like the beating of an enormous, distant heart. The explorers froze and scanned the surroundings, seeking the source of the disturbance. The pulsations grew stronger, and the pillars responded by emitting brighter glows. Telendra noticed the glow intensifying in a wave that traveled across the landscape. She shouted for Kainwen and Vetran to look toward the horizon. There, in the distance, an enormous structure rose from the earth, as if summoned by the commands of the planet itself. The structure was a colossal archway formed from the same iridescent material as the pillars, though it dwarfed those smaller formations by orders of magnitude. It stretched hundreds of meters into the sky, emitting a soft hum that harmonized with the vibrations beneath the explorers' feet. Kainwen ordered the team to retreat to a safer distance, but Telendra insisted on approaching the archway. Her eagerness was almost frantic, driven by the belief that they were witnessing the awakening of a technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Kainwen reluctantly agreed to move closer, but only after the team secured a safe approach path and established communication links with the orbiting vessel. The archway drew them forward like a beacon. As they neared the structure, they saw that its inner surface was lined with shifting patterns of light. The patterns flowed like streams of liquid radiance, weaving themselves into ever-changing designs. The hum emanating from the archway grew louder, vibrating in the explorer's bones. Telendra stepped closer and extended her hand, but Kainwen pulled her back. He insisted that they conduct a full scan before making contact. Vetran deployed a spherical drone that floated toward the archway. The drone scanned the structure's energy output and structural composition. Moments later, readings appeared on Vetran's display screen. He frowned deeply. The energy levels were extraordinarily high, yet stable. The material of the archway was not simply crystalline, but appeared to contain layers of encoded information. Vetran theorized that the structure might be a gateway or portal powered by unknown energy sources. The idea sent a thrill through the team. A functioning gateway on an uncharted world could transform everything humanity believed about the cosmos. It could offer access to distant regions of the galaxy or even other dimensions. Kainwen considered the implications with equal parts wonder and dread. If the gateway led to another world, were there beings on the other side waiting to receive those who passed through? Were they welcoming, indifferent, or hostile? And if the creators of the archway were gone, what fate had befallen them? Before Kainwen could answer those questions, the archway responded to the presence of the drone by generating a pulse of radiant energy. The pulse rippled outward like a luminous shockwave. The drone froze in midair, suspended by an unseen force. Then slowly, it was drawn through the archway and vanished. The glow of the archway intensified, then subsided into a steady shimmer. The team stood speechless as they realized that the gateway was not dormant, but active. Vetran attempted to re-establish contact with the drone, but all signals were lost. The device had passed beyond the reach of the human explorers. Kainwen made the difficult decision to withdraw and return to the lander. They needed to analyze their findings, consult with the crew aboard the orbiting vessel, and determine their next course of action. As they turned to leave, Telendra cast one last look at the archway, her eyes filled with yearning. She whispered that humanity had found something extraordinary, something that might redefine their place in the universe. The team began the trek back, and the sun dipped toward the horizon. The sky turned a deep crimson, and the wind carried a faint, haunting resonance that Kainwen could not explain. He felt the weight of destiny upon his shoulders, though he knew destiny was only a word humanity used to comfort itself in the face of the unknown. What lay ahead was not destiny, but discovery. Yet discovery had always come with risks. As they reached the lander, Telendra paused to examine a smaller pillar nearby. She noticed that its glow dimmed as they approached the craft, as though it recognized that the explorers were leaving. Telendra felt an unexpected pang of regret, as if the planet itself were asking them to stay. But she knew the team had to retreat and prepare. They boarded the lander, sealed the hatch, and began ascent procedures. As the craft lifted from the surface, Kainwen gazed down at the archway, which still shimmered beneath the reddening sky. It glowed like an eye watching their departure. He knew they would return. They had no choice. The gateway was an invitation, a challenge, and perhaps a warning. Humanity had stepped onto Oricida with curiosity and caution, but the planet had answered their presence with revelations that demanded more than observation. It demanded courage. Kainwen's mind raced with possibilities as the lander rose into the atmosphere. Telendra sat beside him, her hands trembling with excitement, and Vetran stared out the window with a troubled expression. None of them spoke, for the magnitude of what they had encountered left them breathless. When the lander broke through the upper atmosphere and the orbiting vessel came into view, Kainwen felt a sudden swell of pride. Humanity had come far to reach this moment, and he believed they were prepared to face what lay ahead. But as the lander approached the docking bay, an alert sounded from the console. Vetran leaned forward, eyes widening. A new signal had appeared on their instruments, a signal emanating from the archway, tracking their flight path. The gateway was watching them, and it was waiting. The docking clamps of the Resolute arrival closed around the returning lander with a low metallic groan that reverberated through the entire airlock chamber. Kainwen stood at the hatch as it cycled through its pressure equalization sequence, watching the indicator lights shift from crimson to green. When the inner door finally opened, the crew of the orbiting vessel greeted the explorers with expressions ranging from anticipation to worry. They had tracked the unusual energy spike from the surface, and the moment the signal from the archway began to align itself with the lander's trajectory, tension spread across the vessel like a tightening rope. Kainwen stepped through first, followed by Telendra and Vetran. Waiting for them were Meridan Tharlos, the chief navigator and an individual whose patience rarely faltered, and Hirani Solen, the commander of the entire mission. Hirani had built a reputation across the fleet for her ability to fuse logic and empathy into every decision. She greeted the returning explorers with a nod, yet her poised demeanor concealed a deep concern that flickered at the edges of her eyes. Without wasting a moment, Hirani led them through the main corridor toward a debriefing chamber. The corridors were lined with softly lit panels that pulsed faintly with each heartbeat of the ship's central reactor. Normally, the ambient hum calmed those aboard, but today it carried a subtle tension that made Kainwen's pulse quicken. By the time they reached the chamber, he felt the enormity of what they were about to explain pressing down on him like a physical weight. The chamber's interior was circular, dominated by a crystalline table that illuminated with holographic projections when activated. Vetran placed his equipment case on the table and connected the sensor module. Immediately, the air above the surface shimmered, forming a rotating depiction of the colossal archway. Every angle, pattern, and flicker of light was reproduced with immaculate detail. The room fell silent as the projection looped endlessly. Hirani exhaled slowly. "Describe your findings." Kainwen began with the pillars, how they glowed, how they responded to touch, how they appeared in organized arrays across the plateau. Telendra added her observations about the etchings beneath their surfaces, explaining her belief that the structures contained encoded information. When she spoke, her voice trembled with excitement, though she made an effort to steady it. Then Vetran explained the energy readings from the archway, including the pulse that had seized the drone and drawn it through the structure. Finally, Kainwen described the signal that had locked onto their departing lander. The moment he spoke those words, a ripple of unease passed through the room. The hologram of the archway shifted into a schematic display of energy lines that reached upward into the atmosphere, following the lander's ascent path. Hirani studied the hologram with her hands clasped behind her back. "It tracked you with precision," she murmured, "not as a threat, at least not yet, but as something that is aware." Telendra nodded vigorously. "Exactly." The pillars and the gateway exhibit characteristics of an integrated system, perhaps a planetary intelligence or a structure designed by an advanced species to monitor its territory. The gateway might be its primary interface. Meriden leaned forward, his brow furrowed. If the gateway is active, it could represent a transportation system, or worse, a means of controlling access to the planet. Vetran interjected, "There's no evidence of aggression, but its power output is extraordinary. We have no idea what lies on the other side." The hologram shifted again, displaying graphs of the energy signature. Hirani studied them, her eyes narrowing slightly. "This signal, it's not random. It is patterned, almost rhythmic. It could be a form of communication." Kainwen felt a tightening in his chest as he considered the implications. If it is communication, then it is directed at us. Telendra clasped her hands together, "Which means something on the planet or within the gateway knows we're here and it wants interaction. This could be the most profound discovery humanity has ever made." Hirani nodded slowly but did not share Telendra's enthusiasm. Profound discoveries often carry profound risks. A hush fell over the chamber. After a moment, Hirani spoke again. "We must proceed carefully. Our next steps will determine not only our safety, but possibly the fate of future exploration missions." Kainwen assembled 2 additional teams. "I want a broader survey of the region surrounding the gateway. Telendra, you'll lead the Biological Analysis Division. Vetran, you will prepare all equipment capable of detecting long-range energy fluctuations." Kainwen exchanged glances with Telendra and Vetran. They nodded in unison. "Understood," Kainwen said. "We'll begin preparations immediately." Hirani held up her hand. "One more thing. The signal locked onto you once. It may attempt to interact again. Maintain maximum caution on the surface." Kainwen agreed, but even as he left the chamber with the others, the thought lingered. What if the gateway was more than a machine? What if the intelligence behind it was observing their every move, gauging their reactions, measuring their intentions? Hours later, After the crew dispersed to their respective duties, Kainwen found himself alone in his quarters. He sat with a tablet in his lap, reviewing the sensor data from the surface. The pulse that had seized the drone showed a pattern, not random fluctuations, but a sequence of spikes and dips that resembled a coded message. Kainwen leaned closer, studying the waveforms. He could not decipher the meaning, but he sensed it carried purpose. A soft chime signaled an incoming transmission. Kainwen set the tablet aside and accepted the call. Telendra appeared on the screen, her expression bright with excitement. "I analyzed additional layers of the pillar etchings," she said without preamble. "They aren't just geometric patterns. They're sequences that repeat with slight variations. It's a language, not one we can decode yet, but definitely a language." Kainwen's pulse quickened. "Are you certain?" "Yes. More than that, I think the language is active. It changes in response to environmental stimuli. When we approached the pillars, the etchings shifted." Kainwen leaned back, absorbing her words. "Then the pillars are part of the planetary system, possibly orbiting the gateway in terms of function." Telendra nodded vigorously. "Exactly, and I believe the gateway is the core. If we can decipher even a portion of the language, we might understand what the gateway is trying to communicate." Kainwen saw the spark in her eyes and felt equal parts admiration and concern. Telendra had a mind shaped for discovery, but that same drive might lead her into danger if she pushed too far. He reminded her to rest before the next day's mission. She reluctantly agreed and signed off. Soon the next day arrived, and the landing teams boarded their shuttles. Kainwen led Team Alpha, joined by Telendra, Vetran, and 4 additional specialists. The shuttle descended through the upper atmosphere, shaking slightly as turbulence buffeted its hull. The red sun glowed beneath the horizon, illuminating the world below in eerie hues of violet and crimson. They landed a kilometer from the gateway to avoid triggering another energy pulse. As the hatch opened, the explorers stepped onto the plateau once more. The pillars glowed faintly, as if acknowledging their return. Kainwen ordered the team to spread out and establish sensor arrays. Vetran and 2 technicians set up equipment to track energy fluctuations. Telendra approached a cluster of pillars with extreme caution, scanning for any shift in their glowing etchings. Kainwen walked toward the rise overlooking the gateway. As he reached the top, he froze. The gateway shimmered with stronger luminosity than the day before. Patterns of light pulsed along its frame in complex sequences. It felt alive, aware, and somehow expectant. Telendra's voice crackled through his communicator. "Kainwen, the pillars are reacting. Their etchings are synchronizing with the patterns on the archway." Before Kainwen could respond, an enormous pulse burst from the gateway. It rolled across the landscape like invisible thunder. Sensors screeched with warnings as the pulse washed over them. The air vibrated, and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. Then came the sound, not a noise, not anything audible, but a vibration deep within their minds. It felt like a whisper made of pure intention. Kainwen staggered, gripping his helmet. Telendra fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the sensation. Vetran cursed under his breath, forcing himself upright. The whisper grew stronger. It carried no words, no language humanity had ever known, yet it conveyed emotion, curiosity, recognition, and something indistinguishable from welcome. Then the world went still. Telendra rose slowly, her breath trembling. She looked at Kainwen with wide eyes. "It reached into our minds, not to harm us, to show us something." Kainwen steadied his breath. "What did it show?" Her voice quivered. "A path. Beyond the gateway, it wants us to follow." Vetran shook his head. "We can't just step through an alien portal on the basis of a psychic nudge." Telendra turned to him, her voice urgent. "It was not a nudge. It was clarity, purpose. I felt guidance." Kainwen looked back at the glowing archway. The patterns danced like beckoning stars. He knew they stood on the threshold of something immense. Something their ancestors could only have imagined. "Stand down," he said finally. "No one approaches the gateway until we understand more." Telendra looked disappointed but obeyed. As the team prepared for further analysis, the glowing patterns dimmed, as if the gateway had given them all the revelation it intended for now. Yet the feeling remained, an invitation left open. Kainwen had no idea where the path would lead. He only knew humanity had been chosen. Whether that was a blessing or a trial was still unknown. The days that followed unfolded with a tension so taut that even the routine hum of the resolute arrival could no longer soften the nerves of those aboard. The crew had returned from the second surface expedition with minds unsettled by the psychic whisper that had rippled through their consciousness. Every individual carried the sensation differently. Some felt exhilaration, some intimidation, some an inexplicable longing. Yet all agreed on one point: the gateway had spoken in its own unfathomable way, and its message had been unmistakable. It had shown them a path, not a map, not a diagram, but a directional impression that left one with the unshakable sense of orientation towards something beyond the arch, as though urging them to step forward. Hirani convened the senior staff in the command hall, a room built for calm deliberation, but now charged with restless energy. The walls displayed rotating projections of the gateway's surface, its luminous patterns now catalogued in thousands of frames. Kainwen stood beside Telendra and Vetran, each mentally preparing for the scrutiny their observations were about to receive. Hirani began the session with her usual calm, though even she seemed aware of the storm gathering beneath the surface. "We need a comprehensive understanding of what occurred during your second descent," she said, her voice measured. "Everything you experienced, every detail you observed. Our decisions must be informed by clarity, not speculation." Kainwen briefly summarized the events leading up to the psychic pulse, though summary hardly felt adequate. How did one describe something that bypassed the senses and went directly into the private corridors of thought? Telendra offered her perspective next, speaking with a caution that contrasted with her usual enthusiasm. "The sensation was not like natural telepathy or induced hallucination," she said. "It carried intention, structured like a message without words." The emotional tone was unmistakable: curiosity, welcome, recognition. It did not feel hostile. Meriden raised a hand. "Or it could be a lure. We have no idea whether its goal is communication or entrapment." Telendra frowned. "Lures exploit fear or confusion. This did neither. It felt like an invitation." Vetran countered, "We cannot assume an alien intelligence interprets emotions the way we do. What feels welcoming to us might be an entirely different mechanism with unknown consequences." Hirani listened without interruption. When the debate subsided, she turned toward Kainwen. "Your assessment?" Kainwen took a steady breath. "I believe the gateway is part of a system designed to detect, evaluate, and perhaps test new arrivals. We triggered a response simply by being present. The pulse scanned us deeply, but I do not think it intended harm. If it had wanted to disable or destroy us, it had more than enough power to do so. Instead, it gave us a directional impression, a path. This suggests the experience was not merely reactive, but deliberate." Hirani nodded once, her expression unreadable. "That aligns with my analysis. However, the question remains, should we follow that path?" A long silence followed. The air felt heavier than the artificial gravity required. Every individual knew the weight of the choice ahead. It was not merely a question of stepping through a portal. It was the decision to embrace an encounter with a civilization whose technology dwarfed their own, whose intentions were unknown, and whose methods of communication were likely far beyond human comprehension. "We cannot ignore the gateway," Telendra said finally, her voice firm despite her nerves. "If we retreat now, we lose the purpose of this mission. We came here to learn, to expand the boundaries of what humanity understands. Walking away would be turning our backs on the greatest discovery in generations." No one argued her point, though the silence that followed did not represent agreement so much as contemplation. Finally, Hirani spoke again. "We will not retreat. But we will not rush blindly forward either. Preparation is essential." The meeting concluded with a cascade of orders. Vetran was instructed to design protective measures for any team approaching the gateway. Telendra was assigned to a cross-disciplinary group tasked with deciphering the pillar etchings and mapping their synchronization with the gateway's patterns. Kainwin was placed in charge of selecting the individuals for the first controlled approach to the gateway's threshold. The crew dispersed, each propelled by a mixture of determination and apprehension. Kainwin returned to the analysis bay, where a cluster of newly gathered scans glowed on the wall-sized displays. As he examined the waveforms of the psychic pulse, he saw something he had not noticed before. Each wave contained embedded frequency modulations that varied in complex intervals, resembling linguistic cadence. It was not language in the human sense, but structured nonetheless. He leaned closer, zooming into the waveforms, tracing their undulations with the back of his knuckles. The pattern repeated every 9 seconds, too regular to be accident, too intentional to be natural fluctuation. Telendra entered quietly. She paused when she saw him studying the display. "You see it too," she said softly. Kainwin nodded. "It's structured. The pulse wasn't a random psychic surge. It was communication." Telendra set her tablet on the console. "I think the gateway is evaluating us, testing our ability to interpret its messages. If we can decipher even the smallest fragment, it might change everything." Kainwin crossed his arms, staring at the repeating modulations. "But why test us? Why not speak directly? Why not provide clarity instead of riddles?" Telendra walked closer, her eyes fixed on the display. "Think of how humanity first attempted communication with species beyond Earth. We began with signals, frequencies, simple patterns. We did not speak in our full languages because we assumed others would not understand. Perhaps we are the ones receiving the simplest output from an intelligence far beyond us." Kainwin considered her words. Humanity had always believed their approach to alien communication would be one of structured attempts to convey meaning gradually. Perhaps they had underestimated how alien the methods of a truly advanced intelligence might be. The gateway was not crude. Its caution might simply reflect awareness, knowledge, a desire to ensure its own safety. The thought unsettled Kainwin more than he expected. There were 5 in total: Telendra, Vetran, and 3 specialists: Narathas Pell, a physicist whose expertise in exotic energy systems made him invaluable; Jonovan Marek, an atmospheric scientist with a penchant for calm reasoning in chaotic situations; and Mirada Calder, a historian of pre-expansion civilizations whose knowledge of symbolic structures and ancient constructs offered perspective few others possessed. The next day, Kainwin gathered the individuals he had chosen for the approach team. He addressed them in the expedition prep chamber, where equipment and modular exosuits lined the walls. "Our mission is straightforward in outline and complex in execution," he said. "We will approach the gateway slowly, observing all changes in its energy output and structure. We will not step through, not yet. Our goal is to establish safe operating distance, test environmental stability, and initiate controlled interaction." Mirada raised a hand. "Will we attempt to provoke a response?" Kainwin nodded. "But cautiously. The gateway responded to proximity, not aggression. We will attempt to replicate the conditions that triggered the pulse, monitor its behavior, and adjust accordingly." Vetran added, "Our suits will be reinforced with layered shielding capable of absorbing most known energy bursts, but we still do not understand the full strength of the gateway. If anything feels unstable, we retreat immediately." Telendra looked at the group, her expression determined. "We must also be prepared for another psychic wave. The previous one did not harm us, but we cannot assume all future interactions will be so gentle." With their preparations complete, the team boarded the shuttle and descended toward the surface once more. The plateau stretched before them, unchanging yet charged with a new meaning, as though the land itself awaited their return. The gateway shimmered in the distance, its patterns shifting slowly like a breathing organism. As they approached, Kainwin felt the same prickling awareness as before, an intangible sensation of being observed. They reached the predetermined proximity marker, a point 50 meters from the archway. The gateway's glow intensified subtly, acknowledging their presence. Telendra activated her scanners, recording the changes. Mirada stepped closer to study the intricate patterns, her eyes following the rhythm of their movement. "Kainwen," she said quietly, "these patterns resemble ritual inscriptions from several ancient human cultures, not in form, but in function. They shift in cycles that imitate ceremonial sequences, opening movements followed by reflective intervals." Narathis moved beside her, examining the luminous etchings. "Cycles that align with the pulse intervals," he murmured. "It's not just communication, it's preparing for what I do not know." The air thickened with anticipation. Then the gateway reacted. A band of light surged across its frame, and the space within the archway shimmered like water disturbed by an unseen hand. The glow brightened into a translucent curtain of shifting radiance, pulsing in those familiar intervals. Telendra gasped, "It's opening." Vetran stepped forward with a scanner. "No, not fully. It's forming a partial activation state, something calibrated for observation." Kainwen looked to the others. "Record everything, do not get closer." But even as he spoke, the psychic whisper returned. This time it was stronger, deeper, flowing through their minds like a river of luminous thought. Kainwen staggered, gripping his helmet. Telendra's breathing hitched, her eyes wide. Mirada fell to one knee, overwhelmed. The whisper carried emotion again, but now it also carried images, impressions, concepts that were neither words nor pictures, but something strange and luminous suspended between both. A vast expanse, a journey, a threshold, a trial, and humanity poised on the brink. Then it ended. Kainwen recovered slowly. The others rose shakily. Narathis spoke first. "It showed me shapes, not places, not beings. Shapes that felt like structures of meaning. I cannot explain it." Mirada nodded weakly. "I saw echoes of movement, a procession perhaps, a ritualistic crossing, thresholds." Telendra's voice trembled. "It showed me the path again, but clearer, not an instruction, a welcome." Kainwen steadied himself, then looked at the gateway. It shimmered with soft radiance, as though satisfied with their response. Vetran approached Kainwen. "If this is a test, we may have passed the first phase." Kainwen exhaled slowly. "The first phase, but what comes next?" No answer came from the gateway, but they could all feel it. The next step had been placed before them like an unspoken command. They would have to cross, soon, and whatever waited beyond would shape the fate of humanity. The days after the second encounter with the psychic whisper settled over the crew like a heavy fog. No one aboard the Resolute Arrival could escape the lingering resonance that had wrapped itself around their thoughts. It clung to them even in sleep. Some described dreams filled with flowing patterns of light, others with vast expanses that seemed to stretch into endless horizons of impossible geometry. Kainwen found himself waking more than once with the sensation that something was waiting just beyond the edge of perception. Not threatening, not ominous, but present. A silent passenger sharing space within his mind. Despite the psychic echoes, the crew worked tirelessly. The mission had entered a new stage, one defined by both duty and inevitability. Hirani observed the crew's behavior carefully. She granted moments of rest where needed, encouraged routines that kept minds steady, and maintained her calm demeanor even when she stood alone in the observation deck staring at the swirling clouds of the planet below. She had not said it aloud, but Kainwen sensed she believed pressing forward was no longer a question of choice, but of timing. Preparations for the next expedition continued at a relentless pace. Analysis teams pored over every waveform, energy fluctuation, pattern shift, and tremor recorded near the gateway. Telendra had become nearly inseparable from the decoding chamber, moving from one crystalline interface to another with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Mirada and Narathis compiled parallel interpretations of the psychic impressions they had received, comparing their experiences in hopes of uncovering a deeper structure behind the gateway's communication attempts. Veterans spent long hours in the engineering bay, strengthening the reinforcement layers built into their exosuits and modifying sensor arrays to detect disturbances the human senses might miss. He worked with a quiet determination, though Kainwan noticed tension creeping into his normally steady posture. Even Vetran, unflappable, grounded, rational, could not deny the gravity of what they now faced. The morning of the third return to the surface arrived under a canopy of crimson clouds. The red sun filtered through the atmosphere like molten glass. As Kainwan and his team boarded the shuttle, the usual ritual of equipment checks and safety protocols felt different, less procedural, more like the opening movements of a ceremony they did not fully understand. The shuttle descended through the clouds, and the plateau emerged like an ancient memory etched into the planet's skin. The shimmering pillars remained arranged in their hauntingly precise formations, glowing faintly as though waiting for the explorers. But today, something was different. As the shuttle landed and the team stepped onto the stone, a low hum swept across the plateau. It vibrated through their boots, through the air, through their very bones. The pillars brightened one by one, illuminating like lanterns in a grand procession. They lit not randomly, but in a sequence, one that flowed from the plateau's eastern ridge toward the gateway. The effect was mesmerizing, almost ceremonial, as though the planet itself acknowledged their arrival and responded in ritual greeting. Kainwan, Telendra whispered, the pillars are reacting more strongly than before. This is deliberate. Vetran swept his scanner toward the glowing formations. Energy levels are elevated but stable, no sign of danger. They're guiding us. Guiding. The word resonated through Kainwan's mind like the whisper had echoed days before. He looked at the illuminated path stretching toward the archway. Even without the glow, he could feel the pull, the same directional impression that the psychic pulse had etched into his thoughts. It was stronger now, unmistakable, like a steady hand pressing gently against the center of his back. He gestured for the team to proceed. The walk across the plateau was surreal. The air shimmered with faint, iridescent waves, distorting the horizon in fluid ripples. The pillars hummed softly as they passed, and their glowing etchings shifted in synchronized patterns that rippled outwards in concentric waves. Telendra moved with careful reverence, running her scanners across the formations without touching them. Mirada observed the shifting cycles with fascination, muttering soft observations about their ritualistic resemblance. This pattern, Mirada said, resembles sequences used in ceremonies of passage across several early human civilizations, markers guiding travelers toward a sacred threshold. If this system is designed to greet new arrivals, it may be reenacting a sequence meant to indicate safe passage. Kainwan paused, meaning it wants us to continue. Yes, Mirada replied, but more than that, it may be preparing for something. The pillars are aligning their cycles as though transmitting a unified signal toward the gateway. Narathas joined them, his scanner blinking with rapid readings. Energy flow is converging. Every pillar within a radius of several hundred meters is channeling power toward the gateway. This isn't random. This is activation. They reached the base of the rise leading to the archway. The gateway loomed ahead, pulsing with brighter light than they had ever seen. Its patterns danced rapidly, weaving together like strands of living silk. The space within the arch shimmered with a shifting curtain of radiance, not solid, not liquid, but something between states, like crystallized light suspended in motion. Kainwan raised his hand, hold position. The team stopped, watching as the gateway intensified its glow. The air thickened with vibration. Then once more, the psychic whisper flooded their thoughts. This time the whisper did not rise gently. It surged, strong, deep, resonant, filling their minds with an overwhelming rush of emotion and imagery. Kainwan staggered, gripping his helmet. Telendra cried out softly, overwhelmed by the wave of sensation. Mirada fell to one knee, clutching her head. Narathas gasped, his breath hitching in his throat. But the whisper was not pain, it was revelation. Images cascaded through their minds, vast corridors of light stretching across cosmic distances, structures of impossible scale rising from the surfaces of planets that felt ancient beyond understanding, and a presence that defied form. Not a being, not exactly. More like an intelligence woven into the fabric of the constructs themselves. It was everywhere and nowhere, both focused and diffuse. It watched them with curiosity, not in the cold way of a distant observer, but with the intent of something that recognized potential. Then came the message, not in words, but in emotion shaped into clarity. You stand where others stood before. You carry the spark of inquiry. You seek what lies beyond. Step forward. The threshold awaits. The psychic wave receded, leaving the explorers gasping for breath. Kainwen rose slowly, stunned by the magnitude of what they had just experienced. Telendra wiped a tear from her cheek, not from fear or pain, but from the raw beauty of the vision. Vetran steadied himself and walked to Kainwen's side, his voice more solemn than Kainwen had ever heard it. "It is calling us," Vetran said. "There is no doubt anymore." Kainwen felt the truth of it deep within him. The gateway pulsed softly now, its earlier intensity giving way to a steady, glowing rhythm. It was waiting, not demanding, not threatening, waiting. Mirada stood and brushed dust from her suit. "Kainwen," she said softly, "this is more than simple exploration. This is a rite of passage. The gateway is not merely a machine. It is part of something vast, an ancient network or order, and we have been acknowledged." Kainwen turned to the team. "We proceed with caution. No one steps through. We test the threshold first." Narathas, deploy the projected sensor grid. Narathas moved forward and activated a small device that expanded into a translucent lattice of rotating crystalline plates. He directed the grid toward the gateway, and it floated into position, scanning the shimmering curtain within the arch. The readings appeared on Vetran's wrist display. His brow tensed. "The field is stable, but I can't analyze its depth. It's not a doorway in any normal sense. It's a transition point." "Transition to what?" Mirada asked. Vetran shook his head. "I cannot know." The sensor grid drifted closer, its crystalline plates vibrated. Then, in a sudden surge, the grid was drawn forward, gently but irresistibly, through the radiant curtain. It vanished into the shimmering light. Kainwen felt his chest tighten. "Did we lose the signal?" "No," Vetran replied in astonishment. "We still have contact." Narathas leaned in. "Where is it?" Vetran paused. "Not here, but not gone." "What does that mean?" Telendra demanded. Vetran stared at his readings, unable to fully comprehend them. "The grid exists. It is transmitting, but the spatial coordinates," he swallowed. "They are not three-dimensional. It is somewhere else. Another plane, another location, another state." Silence fell like a shroud. Kainwen stepped closer to the gateway. The glow intensified slightly, as though responding to him. He felt the familiar pull, gentle but undeniable. The gateway was urging them onward. He turned to the team. "We return to the resolute arrival. We need full analysis before we take the next step." Telendra opened her mouth as if to argue, but something in Kainwen's eyes stopped her. She nodded reluctantly. The return to the shuttle felt strangely heavy, as though the air itself resisted their departure. The pillars dimmed slightly, their hum growing fainter. The gateway's glow softened into a calm shimmer, as if it understood the delay. As if it had seen countless explorers hesitate at the edge of the unknown. Back aboard the resolute arrival, Harani listened to their report with an expression that shifted from astonishment to contemplation. The revelation that the sensor grid had transitioned without destruction or loss of signal shook even her steadfast composure. "We stand on the edge of the greatest discovery in our species' history," she said. "But crossing that threshold is not an action to be taken lightly. We must evaluate every risk, every unknown." Kainwen nodded. "Agreed. But this gateway has tested us. It has shown us visions. It has guided us. I believe it is safe within limits." Vetran added, "We need more safeguards. I want every possible countermeasure prepared, but I agree with Kainwen. It is inviting us." Telendra stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. If we turn back now, we lose not only an opportunity, but a connection. Something ancient and intelligent has reached out to us. We must answer. Hirani looked at each of them in turn. She saw the determination in their eyes, the unshakable truth that had taken root in their minds. Very well, she said finally, you will return tomorrow. And this time, she paused, the magnitude of her next words settling heavily in the air. One of you will step through. The room fell silent. Kainwan felt his heart beat once, slow, deliberate, echoing in his chest like a distant drum. The threshold awaited, and soon humanity would cross it. The night cycle aboard the resolute arrival passed under a hush that felt heavier than any silence produced by machines. Every corridor seemed aware of the coming decision. Every soft footfall carried the weight of what tomorrow would bring. The crew spoke little, not out of fear, but because the magnitude of the moment made ordinary conversation feel inadequate. Even the ambient hum of the starship felt subdued, as though the vessel itself recognized that one of its passengers would soon walk through a doorway older than recorded history. Kainwan slept lightly. Images from the psychic vision continued to drift through his mind in looping fragments. Towering geometric structures spiraling into the sky, horizons of luminous currents, and the omnipresent feeling of a vast intelligence observing him with patient curiosity. When he awoke during one of these impressions, he found his pulse steady rather than frantic. Whatever awaited beyond the gateway, he no longer sensed malice, only purpose. He rose well before the official wake cycle and walked the empty corridor toward the observation deck. The planet hung below like a restless dream, its swirling red and gold atmosphere illuminated by the faint glow of distant starlight. The plateau's position was marked on the tactical overlay, a blinking point of pale blue against the vast expanse. Somewhere down there, the gateway pulsed with ageless vigilance, waiting. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Telendra approached slowly, her expression a mixture of tension and resolve. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Not fully. Nor could I," she joined him at the viewport. "The others are awake as well. The anticipation is difficult to push aside." "Understandable," Kainwan said. "Today changes everything." Telendra glanced at him. "Are you certain you should be the one to step through?" Kainwan did not answer immediately. He had known since yesterday that he would volunteer. The gateway's response to him had been unmistakable. It recognized them all, but its resonance with him had carried a distinct clarity. When the vision had flooded his mind, the emotional shape of the invitation had felt directed, like a hand reaching out specifically to him. "It should be me," he said at last. "I felt the pull first, before the others. If something waits on the other side, I believe it expects my arrival." Telendra exhaled, not in disagreement, but in acceptance. "Then I will prepare the final calibrations. Vetran is already assembling the enhanced monitoring suite." "Thank you," Kainwan replied quietly. They remained for a long moment, gazing at the planet in thoughtful silence. When Hirani's announcement echoed gently through the corridors, summoning the exploration team to the docking chamber, Kainwan felt no hesitation. The chamber was alive with activity. Technicians adjusted the reinforced exosuit with meticulous precision, layering new sensor plates over the arms and chest. Vetran stood beside the equipment rack, verifying the harmonic stabilizers. Mirada and Narathis configured the communication array that would allow the team to maintain contact with him even if the spatial coordinates of his destination defied conventional mapping. Hirani watched all of this with a calm, steady presence. As Kainwan approached, she stepped forward, her voice low. "Your decision is your own," she said. "I will not question it. But know that the entire crew stands with you." Kainwan nodded. "I understand." She rested a hand on his shoulder. "If you feel any sign of danger beyond that threshold, return immediately. The gateway has extended an invitation, but we do not yet know its intent. I will be cautious." She studied him another moment before releasing him. "May your steps be guided." Soon the shuttle was ready. The team boarded with solemn purpose, and within minutes they descended toward the plateau. The crimson clouds parted around them, and the familiar stone landscape rose to meet them like an ancient stage prepared for its final act. When they stepped onto the plateau, the pillars lit once more, brighter this time, almost brilliant. The hum resonated deeply, vibrating through their suits, their bones, their very thoughts. The glow flowed toward the gateway, forming a luminous pathway that seemed to ripple with expectation. The gateway itself shone with a radiance nearing brilliance. The patterns across its arch flowed so quickly now that they resembled living currents rather than static symbols. The inner curtain of shimmering light expanded slightly, as though breathing. Kainwen stepped forward, and the gateway responded instantly. The light brightened, the patterns sharpened, the air hummed with powerful resonance. Mirada gasped softly. "It recognizes you," she whispered. "It truly does." Kainwen activated his suit's primary stabilizers and checked the feedback loop connecting him to the ship. Telemetry scrolled across Vetran's display. "All systems stable," Vetran announced. "Vital metrics are linked. The harmonic lattice is holding without distortion." Narathus checked the communication line. "Your voice should remain clear even if your physical coordinates shift beyond measurable range. If anything destabilizes, we'll pull you back immediately." Telendra approached him last. Her voice was soft. "We will follow if you do not return." Kainwen met her gaze. "I will come back." He turned toward the gateway. The shimmering curtains swirled like a living tapestry. The gentle pull he had felt before now intensified, not forcefully, but with the certainty of a beckoning gesture. He stepped closer. The light warmed the front of his suit, brushing against him like a soft wind. It was not heat he felt, but contact, subtle, intelligent, aware. He placed one hand forward. The radiant surface rippled at his touch. It felt impossibly smooth, like the surface of a river seen through liquid crystal. A wave of emotion flowed into him, not overpowering as before, but guiding. "You may enter." He looked back once. The team watched in unified silence. Then he drew a steady breath and stepped fully into the gateway. The world dissolved. For an instant, or perhaps an eternity, his senses lost their anchor. His body felt both weightless and grounded, expanded and contained, present and unbound. Light swirled around him in infinite spirals. Patterns folded into other patterns, creating depth where none should exist. He felt space stretch and reform around him, reshaping its own rules in ways he could not comprehend. Yet something held him together, a thread, a tether of thought and identity. He could still feel the team beyond the threshold, distant but real. Then, slowly, the brilliance faded. Kainwen found himself standing on solid ground, but the world around him was unlike anything he had ever imagined. He stood beneath a sky filled with flowing rivers of light. Structures rose into the air like sculpted monoliths carved from shifting crystal. Pathways shimmered underfoot, marked by patterns identical to those on the pillars, and everywhere, woven throughout the landscape, was the unmistakable presence of the intelligence that had reached out to them. It did not appear as a figure. Instead, it manifested as a pattern of luminous currents converging at a point directly before him. The light pulsed gently, almost rhythmically. A voice formed within his thoughts, not invasive, not overpowering, but resonant. "Welcome, traveler of the rising species. You have crossed the first threshold." Kainwen stood motionless, surrounded by an environment that felt both impossibly vast and intimately aware. The voice within his thoughts did not echo as the psychic whispers had before. It carried clarity, calm, deliberate, shaped with intent rather than instinct. Before him, the luminous currents formed and reformed in flowing arcs, weaving into increasingly intricate patterns. They were neither a body nor a projection, but an expression of presence, a language given shape. He took one slow step forward. The ground beneath him shimmered with rippling threads of pale iridescence, responding to his movement the way water reacts to the approach of a living creature. He felt no threat, no hostility, only observation and expectation. The voice returned, filled with subtle layers of meaning. "You stand in the threshold realm, a place between what is known and what lies beyond. few have reached this place. Fewer still have been invited. Kainwan swallowed, his breath steady. What is this place? The currents gathered, forming a sweeping arc that opened like a gateway within a gateway. Tendrils of light extended outward, forming geometric shapes that reassembled into new configurations with every passing moment. This is a convergence point, the presence explained. A boundary that links distant regions of existence. Your people would call it a transit nexus, though such a term cannot capture its full nature. Kainwan studied the flickering patterns above him. You created it. It was created by those who came before us, the voice answered. We are caretakers of their design. Each generation adds, maintains, and preserves the pathways for those who ascend toward inquiry. Kainwan felt a calm wash over him at the word inquiry. This place did not exist for conquest or dominance. It served a purpose tied to curiosity and learning, an older echo of humanity's own drive to explore. You reached out to us, Kainwan said. Why? The structure of light undulated like a thoughtful gesture. Your species has begun to touch the fabric of greater understanding. You seek not only to move across the stars, but to understand them. You question your place within them. This marks you as a rising mind, one ready to perceive deeper truths. Kainwan absorbed this in silence. So many civilizations in human history had reached toward the unknown, wondering if anything beyond the familiar stars would answer. And now, finally, something had. He took another step. Are there others, other travelers like us? The response flowed like a breeze across calm water. Yes, many. Some came before your species took its first steps toward the sky. Others arrived long after their own planets had faded into memory. Some remain. Some moved onward, passing through higher thresholds. Kainwan felt a mixture of awe and comfort. Humanity was not alone, not the first to stand upon such a precipice. The idea that other explorers had walked across the same shimmering pathways, guided by similar hopes, connected him to something greater than the sum of all human history. The presence brightened. Your arrival activates a new sequence. The first exploration, the opening of understanding. Kainwan felt a wave of anticipation from within the luminous currents. Something shifted in the air. He sensed an invitation, not to remain here, but to follow. What awaits? He asked. Knowledge, the voice answered simply, and the responsibility that follows it. Kainwan hesitated. He thought of the resolute arrival of Hyrani waiting aboard the starship, of Telandra, Mirida, Narathus, and Vetran standing on the other side of the gateway watching for his return. He thought of humanity's unyielding determination to understand the cosmos and the weight of being the first to stand within this place. I cannot stay here alone, he said. I need to return. My team, my people must know what I have seen. The currents brightened, swirling in graceful spirals. You will return. The threshold is not a prison, but a meeting point. You may pass freely, so long as you remain aligned with inquiry. Kainwan felt relief, though he sensed the truth carried deeper implications. He would be allowed to return, but this was not the end. It was a beginning. Before you go back, the voice continued, you must witness one more truth. The shimmering arc above him widened. The ground shifted subtly, revealing a pathway made of interwoven streams of light descending into the distance. The sky rippled as if peeling away, revealing something beneath it, a deeper layer of existence. Bodies of enormous crystalline formations drifted in slow rotation, their surfaces inscribed with patterns identical to the ones carved into the pillars on the plateau. These structures were not planetary, they were vast, capable of spanning the breadth of worlds. Kainwan's breath caught in his throat. What are those? The presence answered with a resonance that felt older than anything he had ever encountered. Archives, reservoirs of memory, repositories of civilizations that reached this threshold and contributed their knowledge to the growing continuum. A pause. One day your species may add its own. Kainwan felt the weight of the moment sink into him like gravity. These structures held the accumulated understanding of countless civilizations. Every world that had reached for the unknown and found this place had left something behind. He understood now. The gateway was not just a machine, it was a tradition. A path to something far larger than any single species. To witness this is to understand your responsibility, the presence said. To return home is to shape the path ahead. Kainwen let the wonder of the sight settle into his thoughts. He would carry this back, not as a burden, but as a gift. I am ready to return, he said. The currents moved closer, forming a radiant sphere around him. He felt a gentle pull, much softer than the original transition. Space folded silently. The luminous realm dissolved into cascading patterns that slipped through his senses like fading dreamlight. And then he was standing back on the plateau. The gateway's curtain of light receded from his suit, dimming to its calm, steady glow. The air filled with the collective gasp of his team rushing toward him. Telendra reached him first, grasping his arms. Vetran hurried to scan his suit. Mirada and Narathas crowded in, voices layered with questions. Hirani's calm but urgent voice came through the comlink demanding immediate status. Kainwen raised his hands to steady them. He looked at each of their faces, filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. I saw it, he said softly, voice carrying the weight of revelation. I saw what lies beyond. The team fell silent. Hirani's voice came through again, quieter. Kainwen, did you make contact? He nodded. What did you find? Telendra whispered. Kainwen turned toward the glowing gateway. Its light pulsed gently, steadily, no longer a beckoning call, but a steady reminder of what waited beyond. He felt no fear from it now, only purpose. Not a threat, he said, not a weapon, not a trap. He looked at them, eyes steady, a threshold, a convergence point, a meeting place for rising civilizations. Mirada gasped, her gloved hand covering her mouth. Narathas stared at the gateway, stunned. Vetran's normally steady posture faltered for a moment as he absorbed the enormity of what those words meant. It knows we're here, Kainwen continued. It understands us, and it invited us forward. Hirani's breathing came through the comlink. Kainwen, is humanity prepared for such a revelation? He thought of the archives floating in the luminous sky of the threshold realm. Of the civilizations that had come before, each adding something of themselves to the growing continuum of knowledge. He thought of humanity's long history, its triumphs, its failures, its relentless curiosity. I believe we are ready to begin, he said. Hirani was silent for several moments before responding. Then we will prepare. We will not rush, we will learn, we will understand, and we will move wisely. This is the greatest discovery in our history. As the team gathered around him, Kainwen felt the subtle warmth of the gateway's presence fade into the background. Its role in today's journey was complete. It would wait patiently until humanity approached again, ready to take the next step. The pillars around the plateau dimmed, their light softening into quiet reverence. The hum returned to its steady pulse, as though marking the end of a ceremony centuries in the making. Kainwen looked up at the red and gold sky. Something ancient had awakened to humanity's arrival, and humanity, at long last, had awakened to its own potential. Their journey had not ended at the threshold. It had only just begun.